There were some people there launching their kayaks for the day, probably wondering what, this filthy man in a Hawaiian golf shirt is doing running through the parking lot and breathing very loudly. Just keep on ringing there, gotta keep it all up in the air. Alright, let's talk about it. So yesterday I ran the Backcountry Rise half marathon, and I wanted to do a little race report of how it went, talk through everything. I'm assuming I'm just going to flash up the Strava flyby so we can just kind of go through what was going through my mind at each point of the race. The Backcountry Rise is not a race that I thought I was going to be doing until this past week. I was originally signed up for the Post Canyon half marathon, and due to the Whiskey Creek fire in the Columbia River Gorge, that had to be redone and was going to end up being 9 1.5 mile loops with not that much elevation. And this race really for me was like the culmination of a lot of practice that I've been doing and workouts specifically to train for a race that had a lot of up-down, which the original Post Canyon course had like 2,500 feet of gain and loss in the 13 miles. That's really what I was targeting and like really what I was working on. So running like 50 feet per mile, so like a total of like maybe, or 50 feet per lap, I'm sorry. So like maybe a total of like 400 some feet of gain and loss for the whole race was just going to be like a completely different kind of race than I'd been training for. And I really wanted to test myself on the specificity and like what I'd been working on. And also this was a pretty good comparison to the White Salmon half, which I did in June, and so I could kind of gauge like how things went compared to that, which I'll talk about. So let's get into the race. So I got to the St. Helens National Volcanic area the night before, slept in my car. It was a great time, full moon. So the light inside of the car was very bright. Fortunately, I was still able to sleep. I ended up getting a little chilly. It probably got down into the low 50s at night. So definitely should have brought an extra blanket, but I just kind of like piled all the clothes that I brought with me on top of myself under the blanket that I was already under. And that seemed to work out pretty well. So that's what I went with. And then I woke up in the morning, perfect timing, woke up a few minutes before my alarm, and immediately started eating because I wanted to like get some food into my system early before the race so it could kind of like get down, and I could also evacuate some food that I ate yesterday. And so like just kind of help everything push through. So ate, got ready, changed my clothes, made sure I had all the stuff that I wanted for the race kind of put off to the side so that I could just have it ready and I didn't have to think too much when I got to the parking lot. This was at like 6 a.m. I knew that day of race registration started at 6 a.m. so I could just go to the Science Center and park, and I walked in. They checked that I had my carrying capacity for the half marathon. You needed a 12-ounce carrying capacity because we were like deep into the backcountry, and it's good to have a bottle of water or at least be prepared. So proved that I had that, registered for the event, and yeah, just kind of watched the 50K take off. I watched the 50K start. That was pretty neat. I got to see kind of how the race started. You go up this hill, up a road, and then kind of make a U back down a trail, and then you make a turn onto the trail that takes you down towards the lake. And so I got to see like kind of how that was going to work out. I saw the front runners take off, and then Jeremy, one of the race directors, said if you want to see them coming back through, we can just like jump right through here. Hey, click a tat. I got my cat here. Okay, where was I? So then I kind of knew where we went down. I'm sorry, yeah. So there was like kind of a bottleneck there. It was a pretty sharp turn. So I knew that I kind of wanted to not be in like a mix of people when we got to that point, which was very early in the race. So I knew like I should start off kind of out in front. That's kind of where I decided to do that instead of kind of sit back and see what was going to happen, because it was very tight, and it ended up, I'll talk about how there was some overgrowth on the trail, like not anything like super bad, but it was enough that it would have been difficult to pass people. 50K started at 7 a.m. The half marathon started at 8 a.m. This was the first year they had done the half marathon since, I believe, 2017. So it's been a while, and I am assuming, although I don't know, that it has to do with the fact that the Johnston Ridge Observatory is closed due to a washout, and I think the normal 50K or 50-mile course uses that area as an aid station, so I'm guessing there had to be some rerouting. But either way, fortuitous for me, I was able to find out that this race was going on the exact day that the other race that I'd planned on doing was happening, and this race turned out to have 2,800 feet of elevation in the 13 miles. So it was absolutely perfect, exactly what I wanted to race. And it took me to St. Helens, which is somewhere that I haven't really explored that much, which I would like to explore more. Got all warmed up, did like a 15-minute warm-up around 7:30. Made sure I went to the restroom, had plenty of time, got it to the start line. Race starts. I go out in front right away and pushing pretty hard uphill. I think we ended up running like a 6-something mile through this first mile, which it makes a lot of sense because it was a lot of downhill, but it was quite, overgrown to the point where it's like, you're not always 100% sure of like seeing where you're stepping. So like it wasn't so bad that you couldn't see the trail, but there were some spots where it was pretty overgrown. First mile felt great. I'm just kind of cruising. I can hear that someone is behind me, but I have kind of like a rule, like I can't look behind. Like it's just like my own personal rule, like don't look behind it to see where they are, because then I don't know, maybe they think that you're thinking about them, which of course I was thinking about the fact that there was someone behind me and no one in front of me. So I just kept cruising, and as I got to around the 2-ish mile mark, it seemed like we had kind of spread out at that point, and I didn't hear someone so close behind me. Like I could kind of tell when people were behind me because I could either hear, like, I don't know, something clicking in their shorts, like at their keys or a water bottle, or I could hear their legs like swishing through the overgrowth on the side of the trail. So I knew at like the 2-mile mark that there wasn't really anyone that was like right behind me anymore. Like I'd kind of put some time on some people already, and then I was just kind of cruising until I got to a point at, I think, about like just before 3 miles, and it was right on this kind of exposed like little bump out on the lake, and of course like we're right along the edge of the lake, so there's been all kinds of erosion, and like the shoreline has gone up and down, so there was a spot on the trail that had kind of washed out, and I stepped where the washout had happened, and my foot just went completely down into a hole, and I went like face first into the ground, hit my knees. Fortunately, it somehow popped right back up quickly, and it wasn't too bad. Crisis averted. But I don't think I backed off too much, but it definitely like affected me a little bit mentally that I had just crashed. But I made a recovery. I kept chugging. I thought the first aid station was at 5.5 miles. It turns out it was at like a little over 4.5 miles, like just under 5. And so I was kind of taken off guard when we got to it. I had been running alone the whole time up to that point until probably about a half mile before the aid station, and then I kind of heard someone coming up behind me. Like again, I heard the swishing of the overgrowth from their legs running. And so I knew someone was coming up behind me, and I wanted to have my water bottle open so they could quickly fill it at the aid station. But of course, because I had hit the ground, I was covered in dirt, and my knees were bleeding, and my water bottles, both of the nozzles were covered in like fine powder dirt. So I had to like lick off the little nozzles to be able to drink anything without getting all gritty dirt. So I was just like kind of getting some out of my water bottle and like swishing it around on the other one and then spitting it all out. And I was doing that for like a mile and a half, and then we ended up getting to the aid station. Like I said, someone was coming up behind me. I stood at the aid station for a while trying to get my bottles open. Thank you to the volunteers who asked, first how I was doing, because obviously I was covered in dirt and blood, and I was like, I'm fine. They wanted to know if I wanted them to take care of my knees, and I said it's fine. Like it looked worse than it actually was. It's just some scrapes, but it was like just bad looking in the moment. And I got my water filled, and I took off out of the aid station first, and we started the climb. I knew that the climb was going to be tough. It was a 3-mile distance climb with about 1,400 feet of gain in that 3 miles, so quite steep. And me and this guy named Henry started climbing the hill together someday. So we were going up together for probably, maybe only like half a mile, and we kind of chatted a little bit, but then I asked if he wanted to get past, and he eventually did want to get past, and he immediately, I was hiking a little bit because it was so steep, and I was just trying to settle into a groove and not, I'd really pushed it in the first 5 miles, and I didn't want to completely collapse while we were climbing. It was starting to get a little overcast. It did eventually rain later in the race, but at this point the sun had been shining throughout the first 5 miles. The sun was at our face, and when we got on the up toward the climb, we were in more growth of trees, and instead of on the shoreline, so it got cooler. It was quite overgrown, but I think Daybreak had done some trail maintenance along that section, and so there was a lot of cleared out trail that was very nice to run on, very easy, and just kind of grinded up that hill. I knew Henry had taken off, and I didn't see him anymore, so I just assumed that he was gone. I just was trying to run my own race and try to push my own pace and just save enough in the tank, because I knew that this climb was going to be very hard, but then ultimately the climb at the very end of the race was going to be the most challenging, because I was going to be the most exhausted, and it was 500 or 600 feet right at the end, which was going to be brutal. Grinding up the climb, I'm almost at the top out point, and there's a big kind of U that we made, and up ahead I saw Henry, and it was hard to gauge time, but he was actually closer than I thought that he would be, relative to how I thought I was feeling and how I was moving, so I was pretty happy about that, and that gave me a lot of motivation to I think I ran pretty much the rest of the uphill, and just pushed it a little bit more going up that until we reached the crest. While I was up there, I passed by a few day hikers who told me that he was only 90 seconds ahead of me at that point, and I knew we had a 3-mile descent to go, so I was okay, let's go a minute and a half. I felt like I was about to really push down the downhill, and I thought I could maybe make up some of that time, depending upon how the terrain was, because fortunately, I think like probably the first mile and a half of that descent was on like some nice open dirt single track where it was just kind of like on the ridge line, beautiful view. I like definitely want to go back and do this course again just as a hike because it was so amazing and like really take it in. It was tough to take it in as I was running as hard as I could down the hill and trying not to eat it again. We were descending down that. I was absolutely cruising at this point, feeling really good, feeling, in a rhythm, like I was flowing and like I was pushing like almost as hard as I should have been. Like I had like obviously an effort level that I was shooting for, and I was pushing to that effort level. Like I obviously could have pushed harder, but like that wasn't necessarily like the point of this. So, I didn't want to like overdo it because again, I had that climb at the end and I knew there was like still a lot of race to go. This was only like 8.5 miles in and we still had like 5 miles to go. I just push, and I think, I knew that there was an aid station at the bottom of that descent at a parking lot, and so and I knew I probably wasn't going to be stopping there, and so I just came through. I got to the trailhead, cowbells, everything. Thank you, volunteers, y'all are incredible. And they told me that Henry was like 3 minutes ahead of me, so that means he put time on me on the descent when I thought I was absolutely flying and gaining on him. So absolutely hats off to him. He ran like a fabulous race. When they told me 3 minutes, I just started charging. We were on the road between Coldwater Lake and Johnston Ridge Observatory, but of course that road is closed because the Johnston Ridge Observatory is closed. So it was great because I could just zoom down the road without having to worry about any cars coming. There were just some spectators who were going to the aid station to cheer on, their family and friends, and they were really cheerful. They said good job. They thumbs up, clapping. Thank you so much to everybody out there. It was like really motivating. I was trying to run like really hard and as fast as I could to try to get back and try to catch Henry. I did think that people were behind me as I was leaving the last aid station that I just like zoomed through. Obviously when you get into an aid station, there's, they cowbell and there's cheering and everyone's happy. And so as I was leaving, I thought I did hear someone coming into the aid station, so I got pretty concerned. We were spinning around. And I, again thought that maybe I was gaining on him. I was, I slowed a bit on the road as it went on, but overall I thought I ran pretty well on that road section until we got back on the trail at the lake, the boat launch. There were some people there launching their kayaks for the day, probably wondering what, this filthy man in a Hawaiian golf shirt is doing running through the parking lot and breathing very loudly. Got back on the trail. That was definitely not a very long trail section, but it felt really long because it was the end of the race and when you're just so tired and you want it to end, it just seems to take longer. So you just kind of gotta not think about how close you are to the end. And I knew that I was just mentally trying to get to the point where I knew we were turning back onto the trail that we had started on. And I knew that once we got onto that, it's not even like I could celebrate because I had such a climb from that trail up to the finish line. At this point, actually, it started to rain. It started to drizzle. And it was like a pretty heavy drizzle at that point. And I was kind of, it was funny because Henry and I had talked about how we were trying to outrun the rain because we thought that, we knew the rain was coming. It was in the forecast, and it's also able to pop up at any moment out at St. Helens, so we knew it was a possibility. And so it was funny that the rain happened right at the very end, and he might have even, I don't know if he was quite finished yet, maybe when the rain happened, but we just barely got rained on, and it drizzled, and I So at that point, I could look at the trail and see the really big, thick droplets that had hit the dry dirt, and I could tell that there hadn't been footprints going through it recently. So I kind of, at that point during that final climb, knew that I wasn't going to catch him because I was just running out of course. That last climb was like really hard, and I'm like happy with the pace that I went. But I think like if I had seen a glimpse of him, he said after the race he kept looking behind him because he was worried I was coming up on his heels. But I think, yeah, if I had seen him, I probably could have pushed it a little harder. But I mean, either way, just super, super, super happy with the result. Like a second place. This was the second time they'd run the half marathon. The other time was in 2017, and I believe it was the same course. If that's the case, then yeah, me and Henry both broke the previous course record, but obviously Henry now has the new course record as he beat me by like 5.5 minutes. So kudos to him. It was a great time. I would definitely recommend the Backcountry Rise daybreak races in general. Got a meal voucher at the end of the race and was able to get a bowl of rice and curry, which was delicious. Got to eat it while looking at an amazing view of St. Helens. There was all kinds of, like obviously it's kind of a museum for St. Helens, so there was all kinds of cool exhibits and a film that you could watch talking about the history of St. Helens in the area and the eruption, the 80 eruption. Overall, just a really great race. Highly recommend. To talk about it in comparison to the White Salmon Half, I think it went better than the White Salmon Half, honestly, because the White Salmon Half is like still pretty groomed trails. Like there was one section that we did this year that was on some recent timber harvest area. And so that had some twists and turns and some unsure footing, but for the most part it was nice single track cow path dirt trail. And so it was I didn't feel as encumbered by there wasn't as much outside factors slowing me down. Whereas in Backcountry, there were a lot of twists and turns. It's more of a rugged trail. There were a lot of times where you couldn't see the trail for very far in front of you. So when you're trying to run fast, it's really hard to know when you have to make really sharp turns or twists or where your feet are going to be, even 6 or 7 steps ahead. You're not quite sure because you're constantly having to stay engaged. And it was really fun in that sense. And the views, while epic at White Salmon Half, highly recommend White Salmon Half. Like, just such a fun race. Backcountry, just like the views were unreal. Like it's Mount St. Helens. You're just like deep in the true wilderness. Like there's nothing out there. It's a very remote area, which is what's cool about the fact that like there's a 13-mile loop in there that I was able to get deep into the backcountry, see some incredible things, and get back to the parking lot before 10 a.m. And I got to hang out for the rest of the day. But yeah, I think like my time was slower at Backcountry, but I really do think that I raced it better. The end result was better too, place wise, but I think the competition at White Salmon was much stiffer. And so, I do wonder if more people had been in the race. It would have been interesting to actually race alongside people more, other than, that maybe a half mile that I shared with Henry on the initial climb. I didn't really run with anyone else the whole time, so it was really like a solo time trial almost, but trying to chase, I knew he was in front of me. Big race-wise, coming up next is the Mountain Lakes 100. I will be doing a big training camp long weekend in Mount Hood National Forest this coming weekend, so I'll probably film some stuff for that. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. That stuff really does help me out. Like if you like kitties. Mr. Clickatat would really appreciate it if you engaged with this video. I'm a bad content creator. I'm trying to get better. And yeah, tell me if you enjoyed listening to me talk about the half marathon. Let me know if you have any questions. Leave the comments below and I will respond. Talk to y'all later, skaters. Is it recording? No, it's recording. Damn it.